I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Deanne Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? All right, so for this episode, we're going to be talking about some pop culture, which we don't do very often, but I think it was important. A friend in the UK actually sent me this video about Sean P. Diddy Puffy Combs, who we all know, maybe you know, or maybe you don't know, is right now in jail under interrogation for a number of acts at parties and in the relationships that he's had that in our culture we deem as violent. And so he's being called in on that and having to, deal with our criminal legal system in this moment. But the video, which I thought was really interesting, because there are always theories about when somebody from marginalized community gets to a lot of position and power in the US. And we've seen this throughout the history of the US when Black communities in particular are doing extremely well with all of our Black Wall Streets that happened up and down. It wasn't just in Tulsa, y'all. There was some in North Carolina. There was some in Virginia. You should do some research because I had to do some with my young person when she was in school, and we found a whole bunch of them. But whenever there's this Black prosperity that's happening and people in that movement are able to mobilize people, COINTELPRO happens with our Black national movement. And in this Instagram post, you see Sean Puffy Combs, P. Diddy Combs, talking about building a Black nationalist, a Black political project and funding it, not just talking about it, but like actually funding it, and knowing that he has a lot of position and power in any urban or urban loving culture communities. So yeah, and it just, we're not at all negating any of the harm or violence that people experienced in their association with the entertainment and the partying and the things that was happening within his team. But there is this conversation that we can have about when people in power are not going along the status quo in the way that we expect them to, and how they're targeted to get back into the alignment with what is the status quo.
Right. Yeah, so we're going to play this video. Do you know when this interview was done? And do we have a time frame of
I think it was like 3 years ago. I'd have to like look it up.
Yeah.
On the post it said 3 years ago, but I don't know, but we can find that out and you could do a little
Right. And
public
so, and we
bubble.
do know that I feel like it's important to say out loud that the clip that we're going to show was edited, because you can see very clearly that there's jumps in his movement and his body language and whatever. So there's much more to this interview, I guess, that we don't know because we're not seeing it here. So this is just a snapshot to get the conversation rolling. So we're going to let you watch that and listen to that, and we'll come back and talk about it on the other side.
People don't really know me. Like, I'm blessed that I have the money to start this political party. I'm not gonna make no apologies for how much cake I get. That has empowered me, but I know once I get it, I'm going to fund the revolution. I'm a Black nationalist. I'm unapologetically Black. I have to take care of the tribe first. I cannot sit here and watch. This is my blood family. How you think I'm gonna be? I can't worry about nothing else. I love everybody. But right now, I gotta make moves, and I gotta use my power for the advancement of Black people, because we last. All I gotta do is get to action. I don't care if you understand it, you don't understand it. I'm a warrior. I've been in head to head with these folks in corporate America. When they ask the question, is there systemic racism? And nobody answers the question. I'm like, yo, no, hold on. This systemic racism, they trying to keep their foot on the neck up to my level, up to Jay-Z's level, up to LeBron's level. It's an illusion of inclusion by just a couple of us. So I could sit back here in the crib, but I'm not with it. I'm from that same block. I'm a frontliner. I'm with the smoke at any time, no matter where my address is at. We're in a war. This shit is not a fucking game. Everybody needs to wake up. I'm ringing the alarm. I'm having a start right now to organize and to come together, and so we can build our political army unapologetically for the things that matter to us.
What is your reaction or response when you hear that there is a Black nationalist project that is, you know, being
Being thought about. And
envisioned? Yeah.
well, it's interesting, probably even 5 years ago, I think my gut reaction might have been different. Certainly 10 years ago, 15 years ago would have been totally different than it is now. So where I am right now today in myself, I think more power to it. I don't have a lot of faith that whiteness would allow it to flourish. I can only guess and imagine and expect the violence either through actual physical violence or the whisper violence that I call it, that would squelch something like that. We've seen it happen before, obviously, in the past, and I don't think we're at a space where that squelching wouldn't happen again. I think you might be asking about whether or not we think that's what's happening in the case of Diddy. I think two things can be true. I think, full disclosure, I myself am a survivor of domestic violence, and so I am seeing this through a lens of someone who has been through that myself. I'm also a white woman. I'm also a woman of privilege, and so those lenses really challenge me in being able to be fully open to any kind of sense that he's being possibly targeted in a way to stop him from envisioning and realizing this Black nationalist movement that he was speaking about in the clip. It has its own way of coloring that, for me, because I have seen the videos that have been the evidence of his abusive behavior towards others. And so I think two things can be true. I think he can be guilty of perpetrating violence, and he can also be targeted to silence and shut down because of what he would like to see for his community in this country. I think both things can be true.
Hmm. And then when we're talking, we're using the language of Black nationalist
Okay.
movement. How does that resonate with you? Like, what do you hear? What does it bring up for you? And what's your responsiveness to this? And I'm asking this question intentionally and specifically thinking about Black nationalist movements in the past, right? Our Black Panther parties and things like that. And the narratives about people standing in their autonomy and working for their self-determination and using the same privileges as citizens, to carry guns and your Second Amendment right and all of those things, and that being considered and deemed as terrorist, that being kind of the argument that we're seeing right now in when people are in self-defense when it comes to genocide in Gaza. So it's like, I'm curious as to how that sits with you.
Yeah. Thank you for rephrasing, because I'm sure I didn't answer it the first time. There is a larger part of me that would support, and understands and completely applauds and respects the need for a Black nationalist movement, if that's what we're thinking of, and speaking into. There is maybe a significantly smaller, but yet still there, part of my whiteness that has some trepidation around that, some fear. What does that mean for me? Does that mean, because my lens is white nationalism, right? Because that's what I've grown up in and what I benefit from, and up until maybe only 10 years ago, blindly upholded in my day-to-day life. So, and in that respect, that version of nationalism, white nationalism in this case, it was all about uplifting one and depressing another. So if I'm thinking about a nationalist lens, that's my only way of looking at it. So if that means Black nationalist, does that means they are amplified and I'm squashed? And does that generate a fear in me? I'd be lying if I said it didn't. And I understand the need for it. I understand, I've always talked about dismantling whiteness as being a pendulum, really dismantling any oppressive system as being a pendulum. When the pendulum starts swinging, it usually swings too far to the other side first, right? Because it gets momentum. And then over time, it takes a moment to get to the place where it centers, where it balances in the center. And so I would not be surprised if that needed to happen, that it would need to represent the amplification of the Black community and the squashing of the white because of that pendulum swing. And what does that mean? And what would that look like for me? I mean, those are all, I think, human reactions to that. But I also know what whiteness has been doing for 400 years. So if it's going to be a retool of that, just flip-flopped, I'd be lying if I didn't say that was terrifying. Not the amplification part of the Black community, but the squashing of the white. So to me, it's two different things. I don't. That's all raw thoughts. So that's what comes up.
Yeah. No, I appreciate raw thoughts. So I think it's really important to be thinking about like what ethno-nationalism looks like in the context of the
Okay.
US, first of all. And I also find it fascinating in whiteness, nothing that you can help because you're a white woman, but this like one thing means that another thing gets squashed. So what we did see like in the Black Lives Matter movement, which was an ethno-national or Black national movement, but it was just saying we are here, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
belong here
Right.
and we matter too because we've had so long a history of being violently oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that whiteness or any other community at all was impacted. And within the Black nationalist context in the US continent, there's not enough power in Black community to actually squash anyone else. And I also don't know that that ideology ever being mentioned in Black nationalism, even through the history. It's just been like, this is what our self-determination is. This is what our autonomy should look like. We should have the opportunity and the rights to be able to make our own decisions about our lives, where we live, how we raise our children,
Mm-hmm.
because the context of the way that we are existing is under white ideology in its entirety. And
Right.
so because of that, it doesn't allow folks to be in their self-determination and their autonomy in the way that human beings should have under natural law.
Gotcha.
Um, and so any type of ethno-nationalist movement, especially on US territory, is really about recognizing that we don't all want to exist under whiteness. So I just want to make that clarification because I've never known any ethno-nationalist movement to say, and this means that whiteness needs to be squashed. But I do think it is a narrative of whiteness because whiteness in the history that we've experienced
Because that's what we've been
has
doing to
said
everybody
everything has to be
else.
squashed. Yeah, that's, I mean, to your point,
Right.
everything else has to be squashed. Nothing
Right.
else is correct and
That's what I
superior.
meant. That's the
But
lens. That
that's
is
the
where
lens,
my
that's the
framework
experience.
in my head looks like that because that's what we've been doing to other people, anyone that doesn't look like me for 400 years. So I
And we're
totally,
still doing it
yeah. And oh yeah,
today.
it has to stop. Yeah, no. I need to apply it and stop. It's still happening. So yeah, I appreciate that clarification. And yeah, I wasn't, yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that it had to be that. I just,
Mhm.
my
No,
white
that's the ideology.
brilliance
Yeah,
about
no,
that.
that's the
Yeah,
understanding. And
yeah,
so and it's also about like using language, right? Because that language can be weaponized in a way to feed into the fears that do exist because of the history experience that we've had and that we've seen. And
yeah.
that is one, and that's why I asked specifically, like when you hear Black nationalism, what does that bring you to? Because those are any type of ethno-nationalism, the narrative storytelling about the reason why people are mobilizing together or the reason why a puffy, and he said it in the video, is like, I have to take care of my own because it's my blood family,
Mhm.
right? And he's speaking in hypotheticals. We're not like all actually, I mean, we are all actually related, but
Yeah,
that's he was just talking about the family nucleus
right.
and the cultural identity and the ethno identity and the what it's looked like within the history of the United States and the institutionalization of racism and all of those things. So I gotta take care of mine. And you do see that ethnically throughout the history of the US continent, where as people come across, as people have migrated into communities, they want to maintain and hold this kind of ethno-nationalism because it's everything juxtaposed against whiteness and whiteness's existence.
Yeah.
And that's where the power structure lies. And so, yeah, when we are talking about a space being carved out for when you have similar cultures to be able to build, then it really does make sense. As far as talking about like what the new world needs to look like, as
Yeah.
we're shifting into a vibration of more collectivism, being able to celebrate each person's kind of like ethnoculture
Mm.
on the US context and the way that we all work together is the story. Like
Yeah.
that's the story. That's the thing, right? That's like, oh, I am Jay. I wear my hair wrapped. I have my locks. I have my perspective. I can have a conversation and be talking with Deanne about her experience, how we show up and identifying where we are aligned in things, identifying where we have differences, identifying where we need to recognize what our understanding is about anything that's occurring. And with ethno-nationalist movements, you are allowed to, no, it provides the opportunity, not allowed, it provides the opportunity to amplify some of the critical issues. And then you're having multiple ethnic communities being able to do that. And that's going to be really important, specifically in the US, because we're seeing a migration because of all of the violences that are happening in other places where white supremacy is trying to do its thing.
Yeah.
And off the soapbox.
You said, oh, you said a lot. You said a lot. And it's beautiful to envision that possibility. It really is. And I, as a person who is still and will forever be unpacking my indoctrination into the construct that we exist in now, I always love hearing a perspective that lays out that, because it's hard for me to envision what that could look like, because as is evidenced by where I went in the beginning of this, is like I don't know how to see it any other way because that's all I've ever seen. And I'm constantly checking that within myself. And I don't always know when I need to check it until it shows up and says, guess what? You need to check it. and and then I can spend time unpacking that. And it's lovely to listen to a story that can show what it could look like.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
There was another post that I saw where a person is talking about the realities of these identities that we have chosen to label ourselves with, and thinking about the concept of blackness and whiteness
Hmm.
came as a juxtaposition to like this standard, the status quo. And I'm not saying it as eloquently as the person who is like a professor theorist who studied, you know, but if we're thinking about that and we're thinking about like breaking down whiteness, like also would be important because what's your ethnic background? I want you to say it. I know that it's from
Mine,
Mhm.
Irish, Scottish, English, white as white can be. Yes.
Okay, but white as white can be, but if you were talking about the autonomy of like Scottish Irish community in the US, right? And the history of the Scottish Irish community, and we were really talking about like what that experience was and not calling you white, just a white, within the context of whiteness in its
Uh,
whole,
right.
then you have a compassion to what marginalization feels like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
coming and being in the US, and you have a history and stories that are told like Irish people coming out here and the targeting and the US nationalism that happened during those periods of migration, that would really help us to be able to tap into
Yeah.
the experience of other people who have been marginalized and continue to be oppressed today, right?
Hmm.
Because everyone has experienced a history of that one way or the other,
I was just
throughout
able
the
to, my people were able to assimilate because I didn't have the melanin.
assimilate into this thing that didn't exist though, because
Yeah.
it did not exist, right? When German people came over, this is not rocket science. In eighth grade history books,
Yeah.
they show all the pictures of big burly looking German women and caricaturized people from the Asian continent and Irish people with potato sacks all over their like wearing like so you see this caricature harm of like ethno culture being targeted and marginalized if it didn't fit into the status quo. And so we need to be thinking about that
Yeah.
and thinking about getting back to kind of the roots and the foundations of what people have experienced in the US, name those things, and then build a system that is not just juxtaposed against black and whiteness, because
Right.
that's not the reality of what we exist in now. There's a ton of people coming back who own this land, from Mexico and South America,
Yeah.
who are here, rightfully so, because
Right.
we've been here the whole
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
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 All of those, I mean, like, this is how we get to the existence that we should be in. And we've always all been different. Like even if folks are looking the same physiologically, there's still different
Right.
cultural ways of being, different languages. Language helps to formulate what culture is going to be. And I haven't studied in history to know when we got these concepts that like got us to really being in pro-whiteness and anti-blackness. And that's the way that we see the color spectrum of everyone, if you're coming from a US context. We're speaking specifically from a US context because when I am traveling other places, folks don't I don't see people talking about blackness and whiteness in the same way that we do when we're
Yeah. We
American culture.
created a particular set of
Hmm.
construct around that for sure.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah. Yeah.
and history of experience, 100%.
So, so relating it back to the Diddy video that we watched, do you have any thoughts on whether or not you think he is maybe facing the scrutiny that he's facing now because of his vision of a black nationalist? Was it a political party he was talking about or
He said political party.
yeah,
Um, I think it's a both and, right? So to my point, when there is a person of color, any person of color, don't have to be black, but we're in the US. And so to Sean's point in the video, that when people get to a certain position of power, there's only going to be a couple of people that are let into the club. But and he said, and that's not how it's supposed to be. But when you have those specific people that are allowed into the club that then don't fall into the status quo, we have seen a history of those folks being targeted. Like when there's about to be like a big move, like there were rumors that when Michael Jackson was about to start an entire kind of Netflix app thing on the,
okay,
and he had the resources to do that, shut down completely. The harm that Bill Cosby held, but he was also going to start an entertainment network. They haven't done this to our girl Oprah, thankfully, but um, like there is this kind of targeting that happens when people of power that are not traditionally holding power hold power, and then there's also conversation and narratives about the entertainment industry and Hollywood and who participates in what. And now I'm getting into like some serious like Illuminati conspiracy that I don't know it's true, but I do also know enough people in industry to say that there is an element, maybe not the way that we see it given to us in distraction, but there is an element of a club in all the things that we do. There was a private club when I went to my undergraduate university that only select folks could get into, and it gave the the
You do
energy of Illuminati.
feel
But it existed. I knew it was there. I have a friend who got invited to participate, so I know it existed. That was there. And so looking at the industry, looking at the entertainment industry, what I am happy about is that the clubs and all of the harm that can be occurring is being amplified. So that is a testament to where we are universally in this moment in
interesting.
transitioning to be better humans,
Yeah.
right? Because all of the things that have been happening throughout the history of the existence of whatever that industry is really coming to light. We're being made aware of like what's happened to child actors. We're being made aware of these people in power and what they are able to do. It's you can't hold information in the way that you used to hold information because we have too many tools to share information. And I'm happy about that because that awareness allows us to make better decisions about how it is that we are engaging and doing this social experiment with each other, right? It's calling in a certain amount of accountability, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's a lot problematic with the internet and social media and all of those things that we use as connections, and a lot of arguments are made about whether or not it's false connection and all of that. We've had those conversations before, and I'm sure we'll talk about them again. But one of the things that I do appreciate about the internet and social media and all of that is that it pulls routinely subversive behaviors that happened in the shadows. It pulls them into the light. Now, whether or not
Mhm.
people believe them, because there's also the narrative of you can't believe everything you see, which is also true in some aspect with AI and technologies. And you can watch videos all day long that are completely manufactured and they look real as hell. So the, with every advance we make of, okay, now maybe we live our lives in the light a little bit more because information is more readily available, comes the narrative of, yeah, but you can't believe everything you see, and the technology to support it. So it's challenging for sure, but I agree with you that, and I think it was interesting that the three people that you named what, Michael Jackson and Diddy and Bill
Bill
Cosby,
Cosby.
but then said Oprah gets a pass. I wonder if the, not a pass, that wasn't the word you used, but that's what
She
comes.
wasn't targeted yet, is what I
You haven't been
said.
targeted yet. Thank you. But
Mhm.
I think I wonder, does that have anything to do, if that's true, if the theory holds true, is it because she's a woman versus a black man and the tropes of how horrible black men are? But I mean, black women, there are tropes for that too, but it still sometimes can be more skewed. So yeah, I mean, all of these things are so important to think about. I think, on like a closing statement, we don't have any answers and we haven't solved anything, but I think it's so important to just be mindful of all the twists and turns that these things can do. And I said at the top of the show, two things can be true. Diddy can be guilty of the things that he's being accused of, and we want to, say out loud to any survivors of his of trauma with him that we believe survivors always, or at least I'll say that for myself. And he might, there that might be some, maybe they paid more attention, maybe they actually investigated Diddy and cared about what he was doing because he said this other thing. You never know where that spotlight came from that shifted onto him. I don't believe it's just out of the kindness of the carceral system's heart that they saw that he was doing something bad, and so therefore, because we
No,
know
because he's
that
been
ain't
doing it for years.
we
And
know
he's
that
been
ain't
doing it
true.
for years. And a
Because
whole
all the
bunch of
white people
important
out there
people.
that are doing all of this stuff, and we've got mountains of evidence to show their guilt, and yet, they keep sailing. So, we know that that's not the case. And so, yeah, I guess that would be a takeaway for me, is just to always be discerning that what you see is not always the backstory, and the targeting can be very real, even if the person is guilty of what they're being accused of. So.
No, the targeting is very, very real and very intentional and a wonderful distraction. right? Because we were talking about that and like the time period that this comes out, the demographic of people that we know that we need to be engaged in our political system and participating
Yeah.
in our election process and being able to see that just know that these are the type of distractions. And then also, we kind of mentioned this before, Donald Trump going through the same experience with violation in the same way, and how he's getting passes some places
Yeah.
and
Now he's running
other
for
places
president.
not, but
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, and I want to check in to say I heard myself say can be possible, and
mhm.
I heard you come back and say it is happening. So I want to acknowledge that I put the can in there. I was still qualifying it, and I appreciate your correction on that. So
Always.
this is how we have these
This is how
discussions.
we do it.
This is how you do it. I
This is how we
appreciate
do it.
you always.
Yes. No distractions, y'all. Pay attention, be
Distractions.
discerning.
Stay the
Yeah.
course.
Stay the
Hashtag
course.
stay in the course.
All right.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks
I
for joining
give a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your day,
hard?
continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.